in the focus, because so much of it is on the offense of the Saints, over to the defensive side. As I said, we talk about what the Browns got to do, but how about the Saints? I've never been a big fan of our buddy Rob Ryan over there. He never did it for me when he was the defensive coordinator of the Browns. Yeah, he gets some blitzes, and he can occasionally dial up some pressure. I'm not disrespecting in general what he does, but man, he was just the king of, maybe it was just Cleveland because we have this everywhere, but he seems to do it where he goes. Defenses that bend, I don't want to use that expression bend but don't break, because they broke quite a bit too, but they bend a whole lot. They stiffen up when you get down in the red zone a bit, but I was never all that impressed with his defenses. And looking, obviously only one game, and I think the Falcons are very much improved this year, but they give up nearly 600 yards there. They twice had 13-point leads in that game last week and let the other team come back both times. So, those things not boding well defensively for the Saints here against the Browns offense that in the second half showed. And maybe Pittsburgh is just a lesser team than they looked like in the first half against the Browns. But the Browns defense did show that if you let them control the pace, if you let them dictate with their play action, guys will be running wide open. They can hit them, and they can get some chunks of offense. So can the Saints defense be stout enough against the Browns? And that's not even figuring in, can they stop the run with a steady dose of West and Crowell coming at them?
Well, I certainly hope not. I mean, it was really a strange thing that we saw last week out of the Saints defense. I mean, they were completely terrible in 2012, that year that their head coach Sean Payton was suspended for the year. Then they totally bounced back last year, and they were one of the top 5 defenses in the NFL. In fact, they gave up 2,500 yards less last year than they did the previous year. But last week they came right out with the old 2012 defense, and they were just terrible. I mean, the Falcons just ran right through them, ran and passed right through them, and that's got to give the Browns some hope, because, if you see a defense that gave up 568 yards, you got to say, you know what? Let's go at them. Let's just throw everything we have at them. Maybe they'll only give up 450 yards to us. That would be just great. We would certainly love that. But it was really a breakdown all the way around, because you talked about how the Saints weren't able to hang on to those leads. And the big problem was their play calling. They really kept passing the ball too much. They didn't keep the ball on the ground, even though the running backs, Mark Ingram and Pierre Thomas, they were running the ball well. They weren't doing a bad job, but they just didn't keep the ball on the ground, and they kept having to give the ball back, and they weren't able to, run the clock, and they kept bringing the Falcons back into the game. And you got to hope that they're going to fall into that same trap this week, because, when you come out, you lose to a 4-12 team. You go up against the Browns, another 4-12 team. Your first instinct is to get back there with Drew Brees and throw the ball 50 times. And if so, that might actually work in the Browns' favor.
You know what? I'm right there. I want to pick up and jump in, because everybody that we've talked this week, and I do know you're going to have to score some points, but we've heard the words shootout, and you're matching the New Orleans Saints. I've got an interesting little stat here that makes me think that this may play more into the Browns, especially if they can shorten the field and the clock with the running attack. Last year on the road, the New Orleans Saints, and this is not their win-loss, this is simply when you look at the over-under on the game, the under on the betting line was hit 9 out of 10 times in Saints road games last year, which means lower scoring games, and so I'm not talking about 6-3 games, but obviously, trending on the lower side for both teams, which says to me, maybe not so much shootout as obviously you're going to need to put some points on the board. I thought we're looking at a score very similar to something last week, somewhere in the upper 20s, maybe lower 30s, and a narrow victory there for the Browns. But, that's something to keep in mind. That's 90%. That's 9 out of 10 road games last year. The under was reached. I don't know what that is in this game. I don't have any point spreads or anything, but that does show right along with what we've talked about the Saints traditionally being lesser outdoors and lesser on the road.
Well, that's what we have to hope the Browns come up with in a game like this. I mean, the cliche is that the best offense is a good defense. Well, in this case, it's going to be backwards. The Browns' best defense against Drew Brees is a solid offense, and specifically a running offense. You don't want to get into a passing battle. Well, let's see if Brian Hoyer can throw better and for more yards and touchdowns than Drew Brees, because I almost guarantee he's not going to win that fight. But if you have the situation where the Browns can keep the ball on the ground and keep it moving, they ran 6 yards a pop last week. They ran for 183 yards. Now, the formula in the NFL is if you can run the ball 40 times for 200 yards, you're almost certainly going to win. And I think that's got to be the Browns' MO here, because when you look at a guy like Drew Brees and the incredible offensive weapons that he's got, the best way to beat him is to have him standing on the sidelines. And I think that's got to be the Browns' game plan in this game.
And you lean even more on that when we look at the news that Jordan Cameron, regardless if he's already seen them, they've signed Jarrell Robinson. They're looking to, perhaps figure on him not being in there. Tate, as we've already mentioned earlier this week, not being in there. That just, hey, it's next man up. And they definitely have the depth at running back. Of course, losing Cameron hurts even more with him being the main guy you were hoping to be your offensive target there without Josh Gordon. But I thought last week, and Coach Pettin echoed basically the same thoughts this week. Those other guys stepped up and did well. I've always said since training camp, I said, man, Dre and Barnage, nobody's going to remember their names. They're not lighting anything on fire. I'm not saying that these guys are Jimmy Grahams or anything. They're just good, solid tight ends. But sometimes I think in the NFL, good and solid just gets ignored. And I don't just mean in Cleveland. I mean everywhere. Like, that's one of the things that I do like about this Browns roster. When I was mentioning that with JK about overall liking the roster as being one of the best since they've come back, it's because there's a lot more good and solid across the roster. There's still so many holes left to be filled, but I just think it's like he mentioned about how when you get a good coach and then you go, well, I wonder what somebody else could do. We do that very quickly here in Cleveland. We quickly move on from something to the next thing, and that bothers me sometimes. But, getting to good and solid is the step between horrible and decent. You know what I mean? Like, you have to make that step by just being solid across the board. But that's one of the things there. And again, the big question, like you mentioned, is it that 2012 defense, or is it what they saw last year? Because last week it was definitely a jump back in the old DeLorean and the time machine there. Browns had a $183 on the ground last week. I mean, that is truly going to be the key of it. You take pressure off of Hoyer, off of the offense, and then the play action works and everything else kind of goes into it from there. Because to me, that is absolutely the biggest key of it too. And part of me wonders too, and I think Sean Payton's pretty good at getting his guys fired up, but I'll tell you, the worst thing, and I don't mean this in any way like, oh man, the Browns are going to take it to them, but the worst thing you can do is to come in here if you're New Orleans and go, well, we're going to play the Browns. Because I will say, regardless of what level you think the Browns are, this team can definitely play this year with anybody. How long? I don't know. Is it 2 quarters, 3 quarters, 4 quarters? They got to prove to us that they can play a 4-quarter game. But the worst thing they could do, because if New Orleans comes in here looking at the Browns as a guaranteed victory, I'm telling you, for a fact, that'll send them out of town 0-2.
Well, that would really be amazing, considering, I don't know if you read the text that I sent you last week on the air, because I wasn't able to be on the air. I actually picked the Saints to go all the way to the Super Bowl, beating the Seahawks in the NFC title game before eventually losing to the Broncos in the Super Bowl. That's my pick. So the fact that we're considering the Browns possibly beating the Saints, even though the Browns will go into Week 2 with no Ben Tate, no Josh Gordon, and possibly no Jordan Cameron, it's really kind of amazing. And it does say a lot about the depth and the overall higher level of talent, which we've been waiting forever to see on this Browns team. But I think one thing that the Browns are going to have to do is, whether Cameron's out there or not, they really have to utilize the tight ends as pass receivers, because when Atlanta rolled up all these yards last week against the Saints, they weren't bombing them with, throwing the ball all the way down the field all the time. They did a lot of underneath stuff. I think that's what the Browns are going to have to do until the Saints can show that they can stop it. I think they need to protect Hoyer by giving him some nice quick drops, maybe some passes to the tight ends and the running backs, just very quick developing stuff, because like I said, the Falcons didn't, crank the ball down the field, and so the Browns don't necessarily have to do that. They have to do it a few times just to keep the defense honest. But I think that if the Browns can have an effective short to medium range passing game, that they could be effective. Again, considering how bad the Saints were last week, I don't see them completely, reverting to last year's form in 1 week. They've got to have some problems, I think, on that defense.
And you know what? I'm going to qualify everything that we're saying once again by talking about the pressure on Drew Brees, because it doesn't matter. If they spread 5 out, if they sit there and just have all day to pass, I don't care how much you run the ball. I don't care how much the crowd is raucous, and I don't care if Brian Hoyer doesn't throw any interceptions. But if you allow them to do that, you're not going to beat them, because they will be able to just keep going at you. The key is going to be the pressure that the defense can get on Drew Brees. If you can do that and disrupt what they do, then really, everything that we're talking about comes into play. That, more than anything else, is the key to the whole thing. If he's just able to sit back and look around and find the open receiver, he's going to do that. And that's it. That's the key. It's getting your pressure up front.
Yeah, and I think another big key is getting the crowd into it and getting this game off to a good start.
You're not going to have to work hard on that.
You don't want to have a terrible start like last week where you have to try to dig yourself out of an almost impossible hole. But what you want to do is you want to, prevent the game from getting out of hand early, because if you do get down 14-0, 21-0 early, then you do have to get into a passing battle to even have a chance, and that's not going to work. If you can keep the game close, especially if you can start, gashing this Saints defense, then maybe some kind of self-doubt can start to set in, especially if you can go into halftime being in the lead or being close. Maybe you can lost to a 4-12 team last week, and we might do it again this week. So I think the Browns really need to have a strong start and then hopefully hang on down the stretch, and just definitely not get off to such a pathetic start as they did last week.
Absolutely. I'll tell you right now, you're not going to dig out of that hole against the Saints. Like, you put yourself back there, right, it's over before it starts. They're a better team than Pittsburgh is. That's just not going to happen. Let me ask you, what do you see as, I guess, wrapping up your scouting report here of the Saints, give me a couple of things that if they happen, the Browns have no chance to win this game. Obviously, Drew Brees being able to get untracked and be comfortable in that offense would be in that list.
Yes, well, it's not just that. I think that, Joe Hayden and Justin Gabriel have to step up. I mean, last week, of course, Hayden had a terrible game. He was ranked last in all the cornerbacks. Whoever does these rankings, I heard that he was 99th and last. This is Joe Hayden, Pro Bowler. He's had a terrible game. And some people are like, well, he's just a bad matchup with Antonio Brown. For some reason, Brown just has his number. Well, it doesn't matter. Hayden needs to come back, and he needs to show that he needs to not just, stop them, but he needs to make some plays as well. And, Gilbert, he's had a terrible game last week too, and he's not going to be in the number 2 cornerback spot, so he'll have a little bit less competition against him. Hopefully that'll give him a little bit of freedom to come out and make some of the plays that we know that he can eventually do too. Although guys like Hayden have even to become really great, so it's just a long learning curve as far as quarterback goes. But basically, if guys like Hayden and Screen and Gilbert can step up and make some plays against Drew Brees, then I think the Browns definitely have a chance, because I like the Browns' chances of running the ball and at least succeeding in the short pass against the Saints defense.
What do you think does happen? Let's put it on the table, Jeff Gorman. What do you think the Browns do?
Well, I would love to say that the Browns are going to pull the upset. In fact, I got Teddy Bruschi of ESPN said he picking the Browns to upset the Saints, which was a pretty gutsy call on his part. I'd love to think that the Browns are going to do it. I think that I know you're doing it too, of course, but I think the Browns definitely can win this game, but unfortunately, I don't think it's going to happen. It's just too hard, just as J.K. said, to keep Brees down and for an entire game. You look at them, you know they're going to score 30-some points. I got them winning 31-21. The Saints, that is.
By the way, to qualify this, for those of you guys out there going, well, does Jerry pick the Browns to win every game? No, I don't. And
I know you don't.
It's been, I'd have to go back and look, but I'm willing to bet this may be the first game I've picked the Browns to win in perhaps the last 6 or 7. So it's been a while because they obviously had a tough run at the end of last season. But I'm stepping out on the ledge. Just something tells me